South Korea's president has called for an investigation into the sports ministry after the national team's exit from the FIFA World Cup. The Taeguk Warriors could not make the knockouts, losing 1-0 in back-to-back matches against co-host Mexico and South Africa, finishing outside the 8 best third-place teams advancing to the round of 32. Lee Jae Myung apologizing for what he called an unacceptable outcome, putting the blame on incompetence in leadership and a failure in organization and personnel. Head coach Hong Myung-Bo has since resigned. And Grace Shin joins us now in the studio. Grace, we all want our team to win, but why so angry?
So a lot of people in South Korea are very angry because this was considered an opportunity wasted with a so-called dream squad with star players playing in elite European leagues like Son Heung-min, Lee Gang-in, Kim Min-jae, all being part of this national team in the World Cup. But to be eliminated during the group stage, even with a much wider safety net, definitely enraged a lot of South Koreans, but it also became an opportunity for many critics to shed light how that the World Cup exit has become the final piece of evidence that reinforced long-standing concerns about how the Korea Football Association, or KFA, has been governed. That's why, as you reported, the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism says it will investigate possible failures in leadership, management, and even misconduct. And President Lee Jae Myung weighed in, saying this is what happens when incompetence is shown in leadership positions. And note how he's criticizing the KFA here. He's not talking about football tactics, but he's talking about how leaders are appointed and whether institutions are being run properly. So the question in South Korea right now isn't why exactly did the team lose? It's more of who built the system and produced this result.
All right, to answer that question, they're going to have to look very deeply at who built that system. But we've already seen one person take the rep for this exit from the World Cup. Who might that be?
Exactly. Fingers are being pointed to the ex-coach now, that's Hong Myung-Bo, because Hong isn't just another coach. For your background knowledge, he's one of the biggest names in Korean football history. He actually rose to stardom as he captained South Korea during its historic run to the 2002 World Cup. And the 2002 World Cup semifinals remains a very special place in many South Koreans' heart because it really put football on the global grid and demonstrated that South Korea has potential. But the reason why many people are pointing fingers against Hong Myung-Bo is for two reasons. Number one is whether his qualifications met with his appointment in 2024. It was very controversial from the beginning because in 2014, Hong Myung-Bo also was the coach of the national team, but he failed to bring them to win any single match. And complaints were filed to the police in 2024, and nearly 2 years later, the investigation is still ongoing. But an administrative court had found that procedural flaws were definitely evident in Hong's appointment. But police have yet to determine whether any criminal offenses were committed. So whether he was qualified for this appointment is one reason. But another reason is because many football fans and critics are looking at his outdated strategies and whether Hong Myung-Bo really brought up his A game as much as the players did. In this World Cup, it was considered South Korea's strongest squad in years, as I mentioned. And many analysts thought that South Korea had one of its most favorable World Cup group in years. But when Hong Myung-Bo decided to bench Captain Son Heung-min on the bench at kickoff, especially against the match with South Africa, which is much lower in rankings when it comes to FIFA, many were surprised, and many thought that Hong Myung-Bo should have changed his strategies. He should have given more pats on the backs to the players. And especially yesterday, when he decided to resign, he never took accountability as to what mistakes were making, which really enraged the public. And you can see the public outrage in forms of online memes and AI-generated videos. There's also photos of signs that business owners hung up on their wall, on the doors of their walls, saying Hong Myung-Bo is not allowed to enter the premises, showing their anger. And it has actually pushed the police to decide to deploy more than 100 officers at Incheon Airport when Hong Myung-Bo will return to Seoul because there's online death threats going on and authorities warning of possible confrontations.
So it's become much more than football. We heard the president himself refer to the amount of money that has been spent on football in South Korea and therefore the need for accountability by the government for taxpayer money.
Exactly. So the president also noted that institutional responsibility is definitely needed. For years now, the KFA has been in the spotlight for having an unfair electoral college, and they needed reform. So because football takes up such a unique place in South Koreans' heart ever since the 2002 World Cup semifinals when they entered, It really is a cultural significance winning the World Cup. It's a very rare time in South Korea when people gather on the streets together, regardless of political color or any gender issues that may harm, and they're all together. It really symbolizes unity. So fans, of course, are disappointed. But then the fact that the World Cup, when it was a golden opportunity, was lost, that brought another level of rage. And as you mentioned, institutional responsibility was yet again emphasized because South Korean players have demonstrated that they are ready to play on the international field. Now it's the matter of good infrastructure backing them up. And also mentioned the KFA isn't simply a private football organization. Its 2026 budget includes roughly $16 million, which in public funding through the National Sports Promotion Fund and Sports Toto, which is why this has strengthened the government's argument that an organization receiving public money should definitely be held accountable. And much of the criticism is not only towards Hong Myung-Bo, it's also against the KFA president, Chung Mong-gyu, who has led the association for more than a decade, which is unheard of. So we're now hearing more criticism and calls for reform when it comes to who is actually making these decisions. It's become a debate about meritocracy. And we have to note that the World Cup didn't create this crisis. It actually validated it because it's now pointing fingers as to whether South Korea's football leaders have been making the right decision so far.
As President Lee Jae Myung mentioned, when favoritism and cronyism take precedence over competence. Thanks so much for explaining all that to us. Grace Shin on the angry reactions of South Korea to its early exit from the World Cup.